There's no more certainty than data-driven certainty. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. And when I say that, it's actually kind of your story.
Wait, you're gonna tell my story?
I'm going to tell something that arises from your story. So
Okay.
my story begins with a Facebook post that you made about the ring that you wear that tracks your sleep. I'm going to mispronounce it. I think it's Aura, but it could be Aura.
I don't know. It's O-U-R-A. I've never heard it said out loud, so I don't know how you say it. And
Right.
and O has a line over it, so I don't know if that means you have to go like "Arr."
Right, something like that. So my
Or
story
I just call it
starts
the ring.
with your story and a blatant mispronunciation of the product. So it's going swimmingly so far.
Perfect.
But as I understand it, maybe you can explain it better, but it tracks your sleep and you have an app attached to it?
Yes. It is primarily, so it's not unlike all the like Fitbits or Apple Watches, except for some reason they've made the executive decision that I wish wasn't the case. They don't track your daytime stuff, although they do, because they'll tell you like, oh, you rested in the middle of the day. So they're clearly tracking during the day, but they don't log it in the app. It is primarily about getting better sleep and all the data that goes into sleeping. So yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead. I'll let you tell the punchline. Of the
Right.
story.
So what struck me about your post was that you had what I guess is a screenshot of the app.
Mhm.
And my takeaway was that it highlighted the fact that you would, for the way your body works, you would get your best sleep if you went to bed at 7:30 in the evening.
It has always made suggestions of like the best time to go to sleep based on the data that it is gathering from you.
Right.
And for a while it has been telling me, and I used to laugh about this, that for a long time, my ideal time to go to bed was like 8:45 to 10. And as I said in the app, that's not entirely wrong. Based on watching the data and my own experience, it is true. If I stay up past 10, I tend to not go to sleep until like 1, or I fall asleep, but then I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm up for hours. If I do go to bed around like 9 or 9:30, I do tend to sleep straight through till 6 in the morning. And no matter what, I wake up at like 6 in the morning. So if I don't fall asleep till 2, I'm getting like 4 hours of sleep. But the funny thing is, it's now telling me that I should go to bed between 7 and 8:30.
Right. And this is the point. This is why I raised it.
My joke was it thinks I'm a toddler.
Well, this is why I raised it as my story, because it's using this data, and you bought it. You look at the app, so you attach some sort of value to the output or the conclusions reached by this data, but you're not going to follow it. Right?
Oh, yeah, right. So, I did not go to bed between 7 and 8:30 last night.
Right. You don't. So it put me in mind of a lot of information that I get as a business owner, that I know my clients and friends get as business owners, where they basically look at that information and would go, that's interesting. And then just go on with their day. They took the effort, they put in the effort to set up this process or to get this report or to buy this app and to
we need metrics
and to do all of that stuff. And then they're like, yeah, that's okay. I'm not going to follow that.
Right.
But it's interesting.
An important distinction. This is even different than like, oh, I don't think that's right. I am quite certain that they're right. Now, I will split hairs on that a tiny bit. I'm pretty sure if I went to bed at 7:30, I would wake up at like 3 in the morning. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't tried it, but point being, I don't think that it's crazy. I don't think that the app has malfunctioned. I don't think like when I have followed its advice, I have slept better. So I know it is providing me some amount of data-driven certainty. And there's no more certainty than data-driven certainty. So it is providing me data-driven certainty that I believe is true. And I went to bed at 10:35 last night.
Right. And it reminds me so much of my experience in working with clients and even in my own world. It's almost as if there are times when I or people I know would go, God, send me a sign. And then the sign comes and you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yes. So I want to sort of make sure we hit on both directions of the fork in the road that this makes me think. Because on the one hand, we can talk endlessly about either how silly it is or like all whatever judgments we can have for ourselves or others about, well, you have the data and you're ignoring it, or whether you should ignore it or not ignore it. But I actually want to flip it over for a second and use this to actually debunk how much people think they want and need data and matrix and certainty. And I'm not, to be really clear, I love data. A lot of times when clients are having a really hard time with strategic planning of some sort or making some big decision, one of my biggest questions is like, was there any data to look at? Because sometimes it's hard because you're just guessing and you haven't actually looked. Paul and I were working on a budget this last time, and we were over the break, which we haven't done in a while. And we're like, well, how much should we budget for groceries? I was like, well, hold on. We have data. We can pull our credit. Like, why don't we go back and look at how much we're spending on grocery stores? And I'll just, by the way, say we were shocked. So that was
I think
really
everybody would be shocked.
Depressing exercise.
Look at their data, yeah.
Right. So I like data. However, this past year, and certainly for a good portion of this year, we have been in I'll use the word everyone's so tired of hearing, unprecedented level of uncertainty. And it's a double whammy of anxiety because it's heightened uncertainty and less control than we normally have, less options, which just puts anxiety through the roof. And what I think is so interesting about this topic you raise is that I hear all the time, like, if I just knew more, if I had more certainty, if I had more guidance, if I had more, something that would tell me what the right thing to do is, then I would feel better. Well, guess what? We often get that data and we're like, whatever, I'm going to do what I want. So maybe we're actually much more capable of navigating based on whatever it is that made me go to bed at 10:35 last night. Like maybe we don't need so much data and certainty to just make decisions and deal with what comes after.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it, and when I'm kind of gauging my clients and figuring out how this conversation is going to go and what I want to say, because a lot of the work that I do with clients is not limited to determining what my best recommendation is. That's what they want from me. If somebody were to write a job description for me from the client's point of view, they say, well, give me your best recommendation, give me sound advice, et cetera. But that's only half of it, because I can figure out my best recommendation. But then the part that's equally as important, maybe sometimes more important, is figuring out how I can fit that into the way they view the world anyway, to what feels right to them.
Yes.
To put it into a place and express it so that it doesn't, if I can help it, it doesn't go against what I think they're going to say. Well, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sound right to me.
Right.
And that's kind of the planning that I do for conferences. Just to give you a small example. It's a little bit off topic, but it exemplifies the point. If I have two friends coming,
we're very strict about staying directly on topic.
That's why I avoided using the word tangent, because I know how upset you get at those. But if two friends come in and they're forming a business, and I'll say, okay, well, let's, they want to write up the agreement. I'll say, okay, can one of you fire the other? And they're like, no. And that's because it doesn't feel right that one can fire the other. But then, I'll have to put it into context and say, well, what if
Sally develops a meth habit? And she's
well, that's exactly right. What if somebody becomes, develops a habit and they start coming in at 10, leaving at 2, taking a 2-hour lunch.
And stealing money.
What if they embezzle? And you start laying out the scenarios, and then they can say, well, it doesn't feel right. If somebody starts embezzling money, that doesn't feel right that I can't fire them or that we can't get rid of them.
Right. Which is interesting, because I could imagine a version where somebody might hear this conversation and hear that as you, too strong of a word, but like manipulating them. Well, I want them to get this, so I'm going to say it in a way. But what I feel like it's more like is like excavating all of the issue, because the very first part of it, it's like they're in the first little, you're going into a cave and like you're in this first little foyer part of the cave where you're like, ooh, that feels yucky that we could fire each other. And you're like, right, but have you seen this next room of the cave where there are like tigers and you're not considering that, because this room has a nice little warm fire and it feels good. So just helping them see the whole cave, so they can be like, oh yeah, we are going to need some weapons in here in case a tiger comes in or whatever. Weirdest metaphor ever, but
no, but it makes sense. So I think that you have to identify, in your cave metaphor, I think it's the fear that's driving it in. A lot of times when I do agreements or I negotiate or whatever, I have to take what my recommendation is from a practical point of view, and I have to fit it into fair. If I can make create a scenario where people look at it and they go, well, that's fair. Then in much of what I do, then that gets them to the point where, well, that feels right. And it's easier to analyze my recommendation. But if I give my recommendation that, that Lisa can fire Jeff, immediately I go to that place. If I don't think about how to pose the scenario or how to structure the conversation, they get set in their minds a lot of times, well, that's not fair.
Right.
That
So
Lisa
like
can fire me.
like the foyer to
yeah. So you figure it out. In contracts and business relationships, a lot of times it's fair, whether you're dealing employer to employee or partner to partner or customer to vendor, whatever it is. And so I want to take my recommendation and show how it fits within the worldview I believe my clients already have. Otherwise, it'll be like the Aura ring, it'll be like, I hear what you're saying. It's interesting, but that doesn't feel right to me.
That's really interesting. It's that careful dance of I've never liked this phrase, but like sell them what they want, give them what they need. That also feels kind of manipulative, but I think that is a dance of selling them and giving them what they want, but also peppering in what, at least from your perspective, they need. Not being so attached that you force them in some way, but just helping them see things that maybe they don't see, and then allowing them to make their own decisions, obviously. But you made me think of something else that I think is really valuable about the like what feels right is there was a client that I used to sort of reverse do work with when I needed to like bounce some things off of someone. And the reason that I sought him out was specifically because he would often be contrarian about the things. Like he wasn't an easy to convince person. He wasn't somebody who just immediately goes, that sounds cool. And interestingly, like I would also seek, like I'm a person who sees lots of options and possibilities. I'm not as good at narrowing them down. And so I often think that I don't have strong opinions about things sometimes. I mean, there's plenty I have strong opinions about, but there will be times where I feel like, I could take any of these 12 options and I don't really care. But then he would come in and he would like poke a hole in something. And sometimes I'd be like, yeah, I kind of wanted to put a pillow over the head of that anyway. But there would be times where he would poke a hole in something and all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, bum, bum, bum. And I would come to, I was like, oh, I actually do care really strongly about that. But I needed that kind of recommendation. So I think sometimes recommendations can incite more clarity, and sometimes they can incite what feels like clarity, but it's because you don't see the whole thing. So I think there's some interesting, because the message here is not always like listen to the report you got and do what it says. But interestingly, last night I went to bed at 10:35. I didn't sleep very well. It was fitful sleep. I still woke up at 6. I could have slept for another couple hours. I was so tired. And I'm going to try tonight. I'm not going to bed at 7:30. There's no way I'm going to bed at 7:30, but I am going to try to go to bed at like 8. Let's call it 8:30. I start at 8 or 8:30. I'm not going to bed at 8. Like 8:30, and just as an experiment to see what happens, because I think where we can fall down is when we just blow off data, because I see this a lot with like employee surveys and things like that. Like you'll get information that doesn't feel good. I mean, I see it flip the other way too, where you take every little thing that everyone says and take it as gospel. And, well, now we have to change all these things. You're like, okay, maybe not. But I've seen it happen the other way where it's just like, oh, that team's just disgruntled, or like they just sort of blow something off. And I'm like, like there's something here to be considered. Like the data is telling you something, and it's worth at least considering, I guess.
It's funny because the first thing that occurred to me when you were talking is that I've often wished that some tech would show impatience, like your Aura. When you went to bed, it said 7:30 as your bedtime. You went to bed at 10:30, or my GPS if I missed a turn. I every once in a while I think tech should have a feature that goes, "What did I just say?" That just comes back at you.
It's going to drive me crazy. But I think it was my Fitness Pal. I think I could be wrong about that. Somewhere in my trove of Facebook posts, there was something about it because for a short period of time, they were like, it was like there were these passive aggressive notifications that would come up. And honestly, they said things like, oh, so I guess you're not interested in blah, 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 in your health. I mean, it wasn't quite that bad. But I was like, excuse me?
But I do think that the point that you are making for me really is most closely resembles GPS. Because now I have no sense of direction, and I follow GPS. Just I cleave very closely to it.
I thought you would, when you said that a few times about not having a sense of direction. I thought you meant it in this like self-deprecating way, the way you make other facts about yourself. And then over time, I have realized like how little sense of direction you really have.
It's an actual. Yes, it is. It's a cognitive impairment. There's no doubt. But anyway, But so my GPS is as data driven as you can get. It tells you turn right here. There are times, however, in my life, it's not often. In Nikki's life, it's much more because she had a better sense of direction, where she's like, yeah, I know the GPS is telling me to turn, but I don't think that's right. Or I think I should go this way. Or you ignore it. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. But I feel like a lot of these data-driven reports, and maybe even the URA, is treated like GPS, where you're like, okay, I understand, but now I'm going to consider it, and I'm going to make a decision as to whether I follow it. And if I don't, maybe I'll come back around and do it next time, or that I ignore it. But if you find yourself consistently ignoring it, then the question is whether you really want any data or not.
Right. I was seeing if I could find this thing, but I can't find it now. But there was there's something about, knowing something and doing it anyway is brave or something like that. Or like, but so is stupidity. That was not how it's phrased. It was pointed like, and that's why life is hard. It was something pointing out to this, like, and what made me think of that was, as you were talking about GPS, I was thinking about Waze. I use Waze all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this episode reads like we got a bunch of product placement sponsors. Right. Brought to you by Waze, Fitbit, My Fitness Pal, and Aura.
My throat's feeling a little dry. I'm going to go have a Pepsi.
If only. Anyway, I use Waze, and there was a time where I was driving to West Virginia to see my family, and I was like nearing Frederick kind of, and it wanted me to get off on like Route 40 or something. I was like halfway between here and Frederick. And I was like, I'm not getting off on Route 40. It's 70 and I'm headed west and blah, blah, blah. Well, half a mile later, there had been like a tanker truck turn over and like huge fire into the woods. And I mean, it was literally stopped dead, go nowhere, get out of your car and like sit kind of stop dead traffic for like 2 hours. And there was no place to go. And I remember thinking like, okay, Waze, I will listen to the future. However, and this is why there is no like, you always listen, never listen kind of guidance. There have been other times where Waze has told me to get off and exit. And then my next instruction is like, get back on, where they have somehow, the algorithm has calculated, I don't know what the margin for making the thing is. I guess I would have saved like 0.2 seconds in theory if I got off and then got right back on. which is ridiculous. I'm not doing that. And so knowing when to follow the data and the guidance and when to follow your gut and when to ask more questions is obviously the art here. But but I do think that in those times, like the story you told, where I don't question the data, I know it has been right, and I just choose to ignore it, even though I get the results that they're trying to save me from getting. Those are the moments where you really have to step. I can say,
Well,
why am I wearing this ring if I'm not actually going to follow its instructions?
And you can be okay with saying, well, it's just for entertainment value, or it's just for curiosity, or I like seeing what the data is, even though I'm not going to follow it. And there are plenty of things in personal lives and in business. I know that I should be low carb and cut down on sugar and whatever. And then there are Christmas cookies, so it's not that I need more data from people saying, hey, this is what sugar does to you, or this is what caffeine or whatever the evil nutritional thing happens to be at the moment. And so sometimes you just have to make that conscious decision. Okay, I'm not going to pay attention to it and I'm curious about it, but that's it. But then there are those times in my world when I've noticed that the thing that didn't seem right, or this person she was saying things that didn't seem right, but if I notice that she's been consistently right, then I start to it may take me longer than it should, but it starts to feel right after a while, even when it didn't before.
Yeah. The other thing I would say too, though, is if you are just going to ignore the data, then let go of that should. Like because I do think there's harm. It kind of goes back to the time we were talking about, you hold on to these like, oh, I really want to play guitar. I'm like, do you? Because you're like, if you did, you'd be practicing. And so you had the joke so many people have made about all the times you said, gosh, if I had a whole week where I was just could stay home, I would get like all these things done. And you're like, or not, apparently. You've been home a lot and you're not tackling those things. So I do think there is some real value in lightening the load of what shoulds and have tos you're carrying around, that, if I'm going to just completely ignore everything that the ring tells me, then stop pretending like I'm trying to get better at my sleep. Like if I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do, then just do whatever I'm going to do and stop worrying about it. But I think holding the two at the same time, kind of riding two horses, just takes up mental energy. It takes up mental energy. End of sentence.
Well, it does. It takes up mental energy. And if you're a leader of an organization, it also communicates a bit of incoherence, right? Because you can't ride two horses, which means that if you're giving a signal that we are a data-driven organization or we're following this, and you're always taking a cheat day, you're always making an exception here, then I do think that a decision has to be made, because if a decision is not made, the organization is going to know it.
Oh, yeah. One of the most devastating things I heard when I was doing this huge culture project for a big Fortune 125 company, when we were doing all the discovery interviews, multiple people mentioned this like huge sales meeting. There were people there from all over the country for this big rah-rah about and the company line had been for ages, like, we're long-term strategy. This meeting is about like a 2-year plan and like where we need to be in this next year. It's all about this. And everyone had their brains in that mindset. And about halfway through day 2, I can't say for certain that the leader panicked exactly, but I don't have any other explanation for it, where he suddenly flipped over into, yeah, but what are we going to do about this quarter's numbers? And in that particular point in time, those two things, and this happens a lot in business, those two things were like the things that they needed to do that would put them in a good position in 2 years were not going to make their upcoming quarter incredibly impressive. They weren't. They actually had to sort of decide that the upcoming quarter, not sacrifice it, because that mattered too, especially they're a publicly traded company. They can't ignore that. But all the more reason that in order to make this longer haul investment, that they really had to be aligned about why this upcoming quarter was okay to be a certain way. But when the leader shifted gears like that, I had so many people say to me, I don't know which end is up now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. What will I, if I don't pay attention to this quarter, now am I going to get my fingers slapped, or are we looking at this longer term thing? And it disheveled the entire mental capacity of the entire department. It's a huge department. And so I think that's an excellent point, that the real deeper risk of focusing on data but then ignoring it is that people don't know which end is up.
When you were talking about that, I could really see, because to just go back to the initial story, if the leader in that department said that we've just invested, $1 billion in the company-wide Oura Ring, and everybody got the readout from the app that says, hey, this is what we have to do. And then the leader went, yeah, we're not doing that.
Right. And started a movie at 8:15.
And started a movie at 8:15. Then a decision was made, but not something the company is going to be comfortable in following.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.